Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today. The advantage of being the only female on the panel is I get to go first. I'm especially delighted because, for your information, I was asked by an anti-Israel lobby in Canada not to attend this conference after Dr. Stephen Hawking decided to boycott it. He and they obviously don't know what they're missing. It's too bad. There is confusion in the world today in differentiating between the faith of Islam and Islamism. And I thank President Shimon Peres, a man who I respect and admire, and who has clarified this for all of us when he says, and I quote, "Distinguish between the people involved in terror and people who are trying to live their daily life." What is political Islam and where is it headed? This is a loaded question, so allow me to elaborate. Political Islam, or Islamism as we see it today, is a monster that was spawned through the combined ideology of Sayyid Qutb and Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, Maududi in Pakistan, and the rise of Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia. This is how Islamism, in short, enveloped the Sunni majority. In the Shia world, it was Ayatollah Khomeini who, while exiled in France, instead of studying Voltaire, Rousseau, or the spiritual tenets of the faith, was absorbing the mandates of the Muslim Brotherhood, which he later implemented in Iran, as we see today. Islamists essentially misrepresent the faith, demanding radical reorientation of Muslim societies to go back to 7th century Arabia and comply with man-made Sharia law that repudiates modernity in all its forms and has brought death and devastation both within the Muslim world as well as outside its borders. As ugly as terrorism is, Islamism is far more dangerous because it's political theocracy with the Islamists as theocrats, and they have a pathological love of power. What are the defining characteristics of Islamism? It's anti-modern, misanthropic, misogynist, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, jihadist, terrorist, and suicidal. To put it simply, it's Islamic-flavored totalitarianism, and this is a word that was coined by Daniel Pipes. It's based upon the intolerance of others, including Muslims, and the glorification of violence as martyrdom to be exercised against all who disagree with the Islamist rendition of Islam. In short, it's about patriarchy, politics, and power. That the Islamists wield power is a reality I've seen in many places, but mostly while I was at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, where I have the opportunity to speak twice a year. The OIC, which you know is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, a group of 57 Arab Muslim states, which has a permanent delegation to the UN and is the largest international organization outside the UN, holds the rest of the UN hostage due to their numbers. And you know, of course, that some of the OIC countries exist only to slam Israel at every level and to blame the West for every ill in the world, including tsunamis and earthquakes, while screaming Islamophobia when critiqued for their own shortcomings. And these current convulsions created by political Islam are going to get much worse before they get better. And I'll tell you why. Countries that originally showed democratic promise are now headed down a darkish path. Before 9/11, some powerful Islamic states were ruled by dictators, and the only redeeming factors of these dictatorships was that they stroked the religious right and clergy to keep them distant and quiet. As dictators were removed, there was a precarious transition period, and in this interim period, Islamists filled the vacuum and have taken hold. The mandate of the Muslim Brotherhood stemming from Egypt is taking hold all over the Arab and Muslim world, while traditional spiritual Islam is pulling back. Youthful voices of change and reason have been stilled in harsh ways, including through sexual violence against women. And Syria today is an agonizing example of what happens to voices of dissent. Meanwhile, in the civilized West, you won't believe what's happening. Multiculturalism has become the cover for Islamist penetration of the West, and Islamism is in our face. The foe is formidable and has already dug roots in our backyards. Political Islam is on the rise in UK and Europe, where some cities have even installed Sharia zones. There are entire areas of Norway where non-Muslims are not safe, and now political Islam has traveled across the Atlantic to North America. This was not the case when I moved to Canada 25 years ago, and I've seen the same enemy we left behind follow us by stealth and infiltrate our country's private and public sectors, using our very freedoms to push their own insidious agendas. We see this. We see political Islam in the form of Islamic economics, which Western institutions embrace as Islamic banking, but is a new concept even in the Muslim world. According to one estimate, more than $1 trillion are invested in so-called interest-free banking. We see political Islam in the guise of burqas and niqabs, seen more frequently on the streets of Toronto than on the streets of Karachi in Pakistan. The rise of segregated Islamic schools was already a point of concern, but now some public school boards facilitate congregational Friday prayers in public schools, tax-funded public schools, with girls being asked to stand at the back of the hall. Are we living in a secular country, or are we back in the time of Rosa Parks? The weeding out of Islamism and the Islamist threat lodged in the West is an essential prerequisite or the first step in defeating global jihadi warfare of Islamists and helping the Muslim world reconcile itself with modern values of science, technology, democracy, and human rights. Muslims have to move from pre-modern to modern times and change their thinking. But they are not the only ones. The West has to also change its thinking. They can't afford to remain neutral in this clear conflict between political Islam and freedom-loving progressive Muslims, thinking that if they look the other way, and in the case of us Canadians, if they are nice to everyone, the problem will go away or resolve itself. Canada is fertile ground for terrorists to grow, and they are thriving. Just last week, there was a report called The Future of Al-Qaeda. It was released by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, which asked, what might Al-Qaeda look like in 2018? And the short response is that it will likely become bigger, stronger, and more unpredictable. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer a Muslim issue, but a global crisis of enormous proportions. And our challenge is that some Western governments haven't even accepted that the combination of political Islam and political correctness is a lethal combination ready to combust. We defeated communism by breaking down the Berlin Wall. Now we have another wall of an ideology gone amok, which we have to break down. Where does Israel play a role in all of this? Unfortunately, the strongest link the Islamists have is a combined hatred of Israel embedded in their psyche. Islamists have always used the Palestinian issue to keep political Islam alive. And while the Middle East conflict, in my humble opinion, is not one of faith and has never been one about Judaism versus Islam, the Islamists would like to reflect it as a part of Islam and see Israel no longer on the map of the world. The West must now use its friends, progressive Muslims and the State of Israel, to determine a clear strategy for dealing with Islamism. Liberal, democratic, and freedom-loving organizations like Muslims Facing Tomorrow have tried to inform our governments what they are up against. After 9/11, we called for recognition of the real enemy, a violent ideology which cannot be fought with weapons of mass destruction. However, multiculturalism and political correctness keep sidelining the real issues, with any critique of Islamism bringing accusations of racial profiling and Islamophobia, a term coined and that is used to deflect attention away from the real problem. If there is one country that truly gets it, it's Israel. They understand the powerful force of political Islam and have vast experience in determining the psyche of the actual enemy. The rest of the world profiles terrorists as black and white, as good guys versus the bad guys. And while intelligence agencies in the West profile potential terrorists by their looks, I believe Israeli intelligence can see the mind behind the face. This face of the new Islamists has changed, and orders are no longer given from a cave in Tora Bora. There is now cyber jihad taking place online, and according to terrorism experts, this is lethal. Therefore, a new brand of terrorists look like ordinary citizens, like you and me, are homegrown, and in many cases now, they are white converts to Islam. All that I say to you tonight is enough to give us sleepless nights. It gives me sleepless nights. So I've often been asked if I'm afraid for my safety when I speak out. Let me share something with you which you promised not to tell anyone outside this room. I'm 62, and I've been speaking out since I was 2 years old. I was an early learner. What I'm really afraid is what will happen when people don't speak out. Keeping to my time, I'm going to end with the wise words of a wise man in whose honor we are gathered here. Quote, "The most important thing in life is to dare. The most complicated thing in life is to be afraid. The smartest thing in the world is to be a moral person." Thank you once again, President Perez, for inspiring me in particular and many others in general. I hope to keep returning till your centenary. Thank you, Toda.